Today I'm going to teach you Spanish in less than 30 minutes. By the end of this video, you are going to understand the concepts and fundamentals of how Spanish works. Spanish is a front-heavy language, which means that most of the difficult stuff is in the beginning. But once you grasp the core fundamentals and base concepts, the rest of the language is just more exposure and vocabulary. You have some exceptions here and there, but for the most part, 99% of the language falls into these patterns. Spanish grammar is also very basic and structured, so most of the sentences are going to look the same. Pronunciation is also consistent, just like it is in Polish, which means that how a word is written is exactly how it's said. This is one of the big issues of English when you have four words like this: though, through, tough, and thought. They're all spelled so similarly, but they're pronounced differently. In Spanish, for example, como, hablo, importante, no matter how it's written, that's exactly how it's said. Also, if you already speak English, 50 to 60% of the vocabulary in Spanish is the exact same as English, just with a Spanish twist. So for example, information becomes información, important becomes importante, posible becomes possible. And a lot of times when you're trying to guess Spanish vocabulary words, if you just say the English word with a Spanish accent, you'll get close like most of the time. I think most people, if they practice consistently, can get to fluency in under a year, actually. Okay, so let's talk about the core grammar concepts that are very confusing to English speakers. I think by far the hardest concept for people to grasp in the beginning is this idea of conjugations.
What is a conjugation?
Latin languages and Slavic languages combine the pronoun and the verb. Based on who's doing the verb form changes. So in English, we have a little bit of this concept. So for example, I am, you are, they are. The verb is to be, but based on if I'm doing it or you're doing it, it changes. When you're learning Spanish, they'll tell you that putting the pronoun before the verb is optional. So for example, yo como, you can take out the yo and just put como, which means I eat. When you're learning the language, I highly recommend putting the pronoun before the word because it allows you to remember these conjugations over the long period of time. So for example, yo como, tú comes. It sounds a little weird to native Spanish speakers, but it's not grammatically incorrect. It's actually still correct. And then once you get strong enough in the conjugations concept, then you can eventually take out the pronoun in the future. But when you're first starting out, just use the pronoun and it will help you remember the conjugations better.
One of the hacks that I like to use is you can just remember the conjugations for three verbs: poder, necesitar, and tener que. Poder is I can or you can, and you can also use this to pretty much form most of your sentences. You can use necesitar or tener que when you're saying that I need to do something. Just like in English, I have to do something. In Spanish, they have tener que, which is the exact same thing, but you have to conjugate tener. And the benefit of using these three, once you conjugate the first verb, you don't need to conjugate the verb that comes after it. So for example, I need to go to the store. Tengo que, so tener que gets conjugated. Ir, which is go in its infinitive form, al supermercado, to the supermarket. And then I said al because it's a el supermercado, which means to the grocery store. But then when you have a and el next to each other, they get combined and then they make al. Tengo que ir al supermercado. When you want to use poder as a question, can you open the door? ¿Puedes abrir la puerta? And what's also nice is necesitar and tener que and poder are ER verbs and AR verbs. So you get to practice with conjugating for both A verbs and E verbs. So my goal is to try to get you speaking as quickly as possible. So I would definitely lean into this. And then as you get more advanced, then you can start to learn the conjugations for all these other words. By far the best way to get this input is by watching TV shows with accurate subtitles. This is a big problem with a lot of the TV shows and movies that you'll find on Netflix or Amazon Prime. What they say and what is written are two completely different things. That's why I highly recommend using LingoPie. LingoPie is a language learning platform that is focused only on video content, actual TV shows, actual scenes, and real conversations. And LingoPie gives you a whole entire library of content that you can consume in that language. And the best part is that the subtitles are correct and perfectly synced to the videos. If you don't know a word, you just have to click it and you'll instantly get the translation, pronunciation, and
how to use it in different contexts. You can easily put unknown words into flashcards as well. They even have a built-in say it function, which allows you to practice your pronunciation on the spot. Essentially feels like having a mini tutor within your show. I learned Spanish fluently by practicing this immersion method, so I know that it works. They have a deal for my viewers if you guys want to buy a yearly plan, but they also have a free trial if you want to try it for yourself. Check out the link in the description and pinned comment if you guys want to check out LingoPie. One of the concepts that a lot of English speakers have a problem with is the difference between ser and estar. It also explains how a lot of Spanish speakers see emotion. One of the limits of the English language is when you're trying to talk about an emotion that's temporary or how you are as a person. You just say, I am blank. For example, I am angry, like in the moment, or I'm an angry person. If you say I am angry, they mean both. Whereas in Spanish, you can say that soy bravo, I'm an angry person, or estoy bravo, I am angry in the moment. English is so direct and basic. That's why a lot of English speakers have such a basic linear way of thinking. And I think when you're having arguments with people, for example, like your significant other, saying that you are angry versus you are angry in this moment have two completely different contexts. Ser usually will refer to things such as identity, something that is permanent, whereas estar refers to things that are temporary, such as moods or emotions, but it's also where you are, like location, because that can also change. So the basic conceptual difference between ser and estar is one is permanent and one is temporary. Another hard concept in Spanish is the idea of perfect past tense and imperfect past tense. And how my teacher taught it to me was one refers to the action, whereas one refers to a description. So for example, ayer cociné arroz. Yesterday I cooked rice versus antes cocinaba mucho arroz. Before I cooked a lot of rice. Perfective past tense refers to something that happens in an exact moment, and it always comes with something to do with time in the sentence. For example, ayer, like yesterday, hoy, mañana, hace un año. Then you would use the perfective because it refers to a action done at one specific moment. Whereas if you're referring to something in the past tense in general, like you used to eat a lot of rice, or when you were young, you played a lot of video games, then you're gonna use the imperfect version. If it's perfect, it usually will end in an E or an I. So if it's an AR verb, the verb will end with an E with the tilde, with the accent mark. And then if it's an ER or an IR verb, it will end with an I. So dormir, to sleep, yo dormí. Aprender, to learn, aprendí. Hablar, to speak, yo hablé. This is the perfect one. So it refers to the action in one specific moment. You have the imperfect version. So you'll see aba or ia. If it's an ER or an IR verb, it will be ia, aprendía, dormía. If it's aba, it's an AR verb. So hablaba, mostraba, that kind of stuff. Future tense also uses tones, and future tense is actually a lot easier than you think it will be. For example, in the yo conjugation, you just take the base infinitive verb and then you add an e at the end of it with the tone. So comprar becomes compraré. You will buy will be comprarás, and then ella comprará. But one of the easiest ways that a lot of people do it is just remember the conjugation for ir. So like you're going to do something, and then you just remember the verb in its infinitive form as well. Voy a hacer mi trabajo. I'm going to do my work. Él va a jugar videojuegos. He is going to play video games. This is the easiest way and the simplest way to express future tense. One of the confusing words in Spanish is the idea of gustar, saying how you like something, right? In English and in Polish, you'll say I like something, or lubić in Polish, I like lubię. But in Spanish, gustar means to please. People will say like something is giving me like, but if you think about it like something is pleasing me, that is the best way to reframe how that works. But then this form can also be used in other words, such as me importa, it matters to me. Me fascina, it fascinates me. Me encantas, you enchant me. But me encantas is also a way to say that I like you, but it's a much deeper version of that. Another confusing thing is reflexive verbs. In English, we don't really have this concept. Polish, they do have this concept. And it's when the subject of a sentence and the object of the sentence are the same. So for example, if you were to sit down, right? Sentarse is a reflexive verb because you yourself are sitting down. You're doing the action and the action is being done down to you. If you didn't have the reflexive, you would be sitting somebody down. So, por favor, sienta a tu abuela. Que can you please sit down, your grandma, you're doing that action to somebody else. So bañarse, or to take a bath, is a really good example. If you are bathing somebody else, you would just bañar somebody else. But if you're bathing yourself, you're taking a shower, bañarse, you are bathing yourself, you see? So that's what idea of a reflexive verb is. Quedarse is a really common one that you use, and just over time you'll get used to certain words being reflexive. Spanish also has these ideas of accent marks. This is actually very similar to a Chinese tone. When you see the accent mark, you will put the accent in the word on that syllable, and this is how you determine if something is past tense, specifically in the perfect past tense. And you have a couple of exceptions, for example, like yo lo hice, yo lo dije, but most verbs, when they're written in their past form, will have an accent mark on their last syllable. Yo lo hablé, accent on the E, él me habló, and that's how you can tell the difference between hablo and habló. When it's habló, that's in the past tense. But then you'll also have it just in random words, such as teléfono, Inglés. I wouldn't worry about it too much because if you're texting a lot specifically, autocorrect will just fix it for you. But just be aware that these accent marks exist. And there's also some base words that change their meaning based on the accent mark. For example, you have si without the accent mark, and that means if, but then you have si with the accent mark, and this means yes. Because si means yes and if, I think that's representative of Latin culture in general. People will say yes to things, but it doesn't always necessarily mean yes. People are quite flaky, unfortunately. And everything is just kind of like play it by ear, right? This is a common theme when it comes to people who speak Spanish in general, because Spanish people are also like this. They're very, very loose with time. You have tú and tú. Without the accent mark, it refers to possession. Tu maleta, which means your bag, or tu carro, which means your car. Tú in the accent mark is you as a pronoun. So the accent mark is actually very important to know. A lot of people will struggle when you're saying the R's, for example, when it's just one R, pero it's like a soft R, but then if you have two R's next to each other, like carro, perro, then you have to roll the R like you know? If you're a good kisser, I'm sure you'll get it quite quickly. You also have the N with the little squiggly mark, which makes a nia sound, so niña. You have a B and the V sound, which pretty much sound the same, which is interesting because in Chinese, they have the L and the R sound, which sounds very similar, which is why a lot of Asian people like Japanese or Chinese have a problem saying that R. In Spanish, you have veinte or vente, I believe written with a V, but I've heard people say it with a B or a V. You have the J or a G. I believe when the G is next to an E, then you'll make a H, like jota, gente, jamón. And you have double L, which makes a Y sound. In Medellín, they would pronounce it like J. A lot of people will say it like a Y, like with a Y sound, you know? So this also depends based on region. Por versus para. The main idea is para is used for a goal, a destination, or a purpose, whereas por is used for a cause or reason or a process. So for example, estudio para mi futuro. I'm studying for my future, so it's a goal to get somewhere. Lo hice por amor. I did it because of love. But this is also one of these things that it gets clearer over time, because now when I hear por or para, I just associate it with certain phrases, and after learning the language for a good enough time, you just intuitively know, okay, that sounds wrong. That sounds right. Latin languages and the Slavic languages also have this thing where nouns are gendered, but it doesn't refer to actual gender, it's just how things are classified. Most common masculine noun endings are o, like el libro or el carro. You have ma, like problema, sistema, programa, idioma. You have words that end in or, like el doctor, el actor, but then if it's a feminine person, then it changes to la doctora, la actriz. Something that ends with aye, like el viaje, pasaje, lenguaje, and a lot of nouns ending in consonants, such as hotel, tren, papel, país. It's not universally true, but for the most part, these words will be masculine, whereas most common feminine noun endings end with an A. This can be confusing because you have words like idioma or planeta, which are masculine. Agua is still a feminine noun, but in el agua, because la agua sounds weird, they change it to el. If it ends in ción, like la información, la decisión, that is a feminine noun. If it ends with dad, like unidad, universidad, la libertad. La costumbre, this is also feminine. La serie, la especie. Okay, la moto, la foto are also feminine because the full word of moto is motocicleta, fotografía. So that's why those will be la, even though they end with an O. This is actually, I think, one of the hardest concepts for English speakers to grasp because there's a lot of things that the gender will tell you. The gender of the noun tells you how to change the gender of the adjective because the adjective and the noun always have to match. And if it's plural, you add an S on both the adjective and the noun. Whereas in English, you don't have to add an S to the adjective, you just add it to the noun, and the adjectives don't change based on gender in English. Also in English, you have the adjective that comes before the noun, whereas in Spanish, the adjective comes afterwards. There's no shortcut to this, you just have to keep on practicing it and you get better over time. But how it's stuck in my head is that every single noun that I want to do, imagine you have like parentheses, and this noun with this adjective, and if it's plural or singular, is like one little parentheses, and then this group of nouns with adjective is also another parentheses. And if you can group words and things that way, maybe it'll make a little bit more sense in your head. You have to use articles when you're talking about general concept for things. In English, we'll say, I like coffee. In Spanish, we'll say, me gusta el café. You have to put the article. Whereas in Slavic languages, they don't have the article at all, right? So that can be a little confusing as well. In English, when you're asking a question, you usually will put like do or can to turn it into a question. Whereas in Spanish, you can say the exact same sentence, but you just say it with a question tone. For example, a sentence, tú comes arroz, you eat rice. If you want to turn that into a question, it would be tú comes arroz. The exact same sentence, but with a different tone. One of the most common words that you use is I, which is a conjugation for haber, but you pretty much use I for if something exists in general, right? So, ahí hay dos personas. Whether it's one thing or plural, you will use I for everything. Subjunctive in its base form refers to a wish or something that is not certain. This is the conceptual idea behind it. But I only really hear it heard in a few contexts. Number one, when you're trying to wish something or you want something for somebody. Quiero que encuentres una pareja. I want you to find a partner. They don't have a partner yet. It's uncertain, but that's something, it's a wish that I want for you. Busco compañero de casa que sea hombre. I'm looking for a roommate that is a man. You don't know who the roommate is. It's uncertain. It can be a man or a woman, but you're looking for someone que sea that will be a man. A lot of people will say para qué. So for something, lo voy a preparar para que lo tengas. I'm going to prepare it so that you have it. You don't have it yet. It's something in the future that we're not entirely sure of. When you're doing a negative imperative, you're telling someone not to do something. It would use the subjunctive conjugations. I grouped this together under subjunctive, and my friends have told me that it's technically not subjunctive, even though all the conjugations are the same. And if it's all the same conjugations, then to me it's the same thing anyways. Something you hear often is like, que estés bien, or que Dios te bendiga, which is essentially the wish form of subjunctive. They just take out the wish verb. So they take out quiero or espero. You just start with que, and then que estés bien. I hope that you are well. Que Dios le bendiga. I hope that God blesses you. So you're probably asking, why is it estés? Isn't it estar? So shouldn't it be estás? Well, this is a key function of subjunctive, and when you want to make subjunctive, so you start with the yo form of the verb, you take out the o, and then you replace it with the opposite vowel ending. So for example, if it's an AR verb, the ending becomes e. If it's an ER or an IR verb, the ending becomes a. So for example, tener is an ER verb. When you change it to subjunctive is tenga. Que tengas un buen día. That's the subjunctive form, and then the regular form would be tienes. And a verb like hablar, yo hablo, you turn the A into an E. No le hables, don't speak to him. Subjunctive can be a little confusing because there are a lot of exceptions actually to this form, but this is more advanced B1, B2 stuff. In the beginning, you don't have to really worry about it. This is important to know, but you don't have to go super in depth until you're highly advanced. So if you guys want to see my Spanish journey, I have a playlist on my channel documenting from when I first started learning Spanish up until now. And I recently did an interview on Spanish Hacks podcast, a whole entire 1-hour interview in Spanish. It's been 2.5 years since I was in Colombia, so my accent is not as good anymore and my vocabulary is not as good, but just kind of like riding a bike, even though you don't use it for a while, once you kind of get warmed up a little bit, language comes back very quickly. Now we're going to talk about how to learn Spanish without burning out. I think a lot of people discount themselves by saying that they're bad at languages, but we all speak our native language. In societies like China or Japan or here in Poland, where their languages are super complicated, even the dumbest people can learn the language.
What?
So the most important mindset shift is not how can I translate this into Spanish, but how would a Spanish speaker communicate this idea? One of the big problems with a lot of traditional lessons or books is that reading through it feels like such a chore that it's hard to make time to do that in your everyday life. If you don't have fun while you're practicing it, it's hard to stick with it long term, because on the days where you just don't feel motivated, if the activity itself is not fun, you're less likely to do it. For example, I like to play video games. So even on a day where I'm super tired, I can load up a video game, and if I'm playing it in Polish, I maybe not am fully paying attention, but I'm still learning words and practicing. And those little decisions add up over time. You also have to really have a strong why for why you're learning the language, because if you're just doing it for fun, on the days where you have to prioritize certain activity over others, you have to remember why you're doing something, or else you just lose motivation to do it entirely. I used to teach piano for 7 years before I moved abroad, and I could always tell when my students didn't practice consistently, because if you cram the night before, maybe you'll get a lot of reps, but the most progress was always made when people practice 3 times a day for a week. Because in order to learn any skill when it comes to language or playing piano, your brain needs to sleep in order to retain the information. By far, the most effective way to learn a language is through immersion. Now, I know that this is not possible for most people, but if you are able to get a form of a remote job, move to a different country for 3 to 6 months and you will pick up the language very quickly. When I was trying to study Spanish on my own for a year, I was listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos, but over a span of a year, I barely reached like high A1, if that. But then when I moved to Colombia, I thought I knew Spanish and they placement tested me in the first level of A1. But after 2 weeks of taking lessons and just immersing myself into the culture, I was able to skip to A2, especially if you go out to the market or if you're walking on the street, if you have to order. All these little interactions added up throughout the day can potentially lead to 15 to 20 minutes of speaking that language every single day. Plus you're seeing the text everywhere, you're hearing it on the street. All little things add up over time, removing a lot of barriers to interacting with that language. I was able to get conversational, I believe, in around 3 to 6 months, and I was able to live completely on my own in Spanish in less than a year. I think a lot of people are so focused on the lessons or the right course that they have to take. These courses are only about 20% of your language journey. 80% of it is how you study it outside of the classroom and how you use it in your everyday life. If you guys are looking for a Spanish school, I highly recommend the school that I went to, Elefun. It's based in Colombia and they do online lessons and in-person lessons in Medellín. I'm living proof that their lessons work, and if you guys are interested, I'll put their contact information in the pinned comment and description as well. The next thing I recommend doing is listening to music. It's very easy to find Spanish music that you will like. Reggaeton is worldwide right now. Everybody loves reggaeton, but you also have salsa, bachata, pop. They have their version of rock. They have rancheros. They have pretty much a whole entire continent, South America. Most of that continent speaks Spanish and makes music in Spanish, and you also have Spain. If you're a Christian, they have a lot of really good Spanish Christian songs that are the exact same melody as the English ones, but with Spanish lyrics. And I love that a lot of Spanish music is also associated with dance. So if you enjoy going out and dancing, that's another way to expose yourself to the music. Music is very important because it allows you to say the words in real time. And when it's connected to a melody, it trains your brain into how to pronounce these words. And especially if you're listening to like rap songs, if you can imitate a rap in full time, just the connection between the pronunciation and the melody mixed together helps it stick in your brain better. So that's why songs can get stuck in your head even though you don't know all of the lyrics. TV shows and movies are one of the best ways to learn a language. Thankfully, because Spanish is so popular, most shows will have a Spanish audio. I highly recommend watching cartoons from the beginning because the mouth movement and what they say doesn't 100% match, but it's close enough and it's good enough for you to feel immersed into whatever you're watching. You can start watching TV shows from as early as the beginning of learning a language, but I highly recommend doing this once you reach around A2 because you have a pretty good baseline of how the grammar works, of some baseline vocabulary. So the time spent watching TV will actually be a lot more worth it. If you don't know anything about the language and you just watch TV, you'll pick up some things here and there, but I feel like it's not the best use of your time. So a lot of people will recommend using flashcards, and there's a lot of programs out there. Some people say Quizlet is really good because you can take words from a list and just copy and paste them and they make flashcards for you. I have always used Anki. The system itself is a little outdated, but it's based on a space repetition algorithm, which exposes you to words immediately, over 3 days, over a week, and over a month. And this is how you learn languages. You have to be continuously exposed to certain words over an extended period of time. But it can be a real chore putting in each individual word into your library. I would say that flashcards do work, especially when you're trying to learn vocab, but it's very hard to make the habit stick for some reason. I always tell myself, oh, I can go over to flashcards on the tram, or I can go over to flashcards when I'm eating dinner. But it feels like for such a small amount of time, such a big mental effort, so it's hard for me to really like get into that habit. It may work for some people if you're disciplined enough to, do 20 to 30 flashcards every single night. Your vocabulary will increase a lot. But for me, I've always found it difficult to do. I used Enki a lot in the beginning, probably the first 2 or 3 months of learning Spanish because I wanted to learn as much vocabulary as possible. But I've noticed that if you just live your everyday life in Spanish, you'll learn vocabulary words through emotional experiences that you have in real life, which makes it a lot easier to stick. So flashcards, I think, are like a supplementary method if you want to improve on vocab. I would not make this your main method. If you are a gamer like me, this is an excellent way to learn a language. First, you can turn your gaming console into the language that you want to learn. And video games are a great medium because usually the audio and the subtitles are the same. One of the things I like about the Naughty Dog games is that a lot of them allow you to change the spoken audio, subtitles, and the game text. They are all separate options. So you can keep the game text in English, but then you can have everything else be in Spanish. So that way, the most confusing parts of how to play the game, you can read in your native language, but when the characters are speaking or interacting with each other, they'll be in the language that you're trying to learn. So you get the best of both worlds. A lot of multiplayer games, for example, like Overwatch or Call of Duty, Rocket League, a lot of these have Spanish audio and text as well. And video games will often use certain words repetitively in referring to certain actions, and then when they ask you to go to this thing or, find this thing. Something that I previously recommended was going to a language exchange where you talk with people who want to learn English and they can also teach you Spanish. But I feel like it's not a really good use of your time, especially if you have a language exchange, for example, at a cafe or something, right? The time and effort it takes to get ready, to travel there, and then to travel back, to me is just not really worth the effort. You can find people online to do video calls with to do the language exchange. I feel like most people don't stick with it in the long term, and it doesn't feel like a good use of your time. If you're able to find time for this in your life and commit to it, I think this could be quite effective. And I think one of the most underrated ways to learn Spanish is by teaching English to Spanish speakers. And when I was first learning the language, for about 3 months, I was giving English lessons. Because you are constantly translating back and forth between English and Spanish, it teaches you a lot of the base rules of Spanish, actually. It allows you to get practice in the language while also getting paid for it. So this is another good bang for your buck. If you guys like this video, I'll make a new one in the future talking about how to speak Spanish, where we can go more into grammar structures of a sentence, popular phrases, popular ways that you can say certain things to get you in the mindset of being able to speak Spanish. Other than that, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.